Hi, friends. Father Carey here, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one reflecting on a truth that all of us really know deep down inside. Dying is a hard business. Death is a hard thing that you and I must endure. There's nothing that can be said to ameliorate it. Trust me, when you reach your biblical 70, you become even more acutely aware of the hardness of dying, of the hardness of mortality. Our awareness of death is really always with us. It haunts us. It serves as the backdrop for all of our activities in life. Even if we don't consciously think about our own mortality, it is always there in the back of our minds, nagging us, prodding us, pushing us, whispering to us. So much so that one contemporary philosopher by the name of Todd May actually says that death is the most important thing about being human. It's not the only important thing, but it's the most important thing, says Todd May, because it serves as that backdrop, as that constant whisper. And what it whispers to us, if we listen, is that death is hard. We do not want to die, and yet we know we must. So then the question is, why is dying hard? Why is death hard? If we leave aside the physical discomfort that frequently accompanies the act of dying, we can arrive at two different possibilities that explain why it is that dying and death are so hard. One, it seems to me, is a bleak vision that can corrode our enjoyment of life. The other, while not for a second denying that death and dying are hard, is a less bleak vision that could very well enhance our appreciation of and pleasure in life. So, the first perspective about why dying is hard. It seems to me that it's been nowhere better expressed fictionally than in Leo Tolstoy's novella, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. The main character there is a middle aged guy who is dying of some kind of malignancy. And as the disease progresses and he recognizes that he's not going to get better, he begins to have nightmares. And the nightmare has him being thrust forcibly and against his will into a mysterious black sack. And he's resisting with all of his might. And he sometimes awakens shouting out, "No, I won't go. I won't do it." He, of course, is resisting the black sack of death. He's terrified. One of the reasons why we may find death so hard is that we find it terrifying. But why? What is there about dying and death that so frightens us? Well, it seems to me that there are any number of explanations, but three really come to mind. And the first is this, and perhaps the most salient. Being dead is uncanny. It is unimaginable. We have no experience of what it means for us to be dead. Looking at a corpse, looking at roadkill, in no way whatsoever tells us anything about our death. Oh, I know we can pretend that we're dead and we can imagine ourselves lying in a coffin, but that, of course, is just play acting. There is no way that we can possibly imagine a state of non being. Imagine ceasing to be, no longer existing. And it makes it uncanny as a consequence. And that which is uncanny tends to frighten us. There's another reason why we may find death so frightening that it makes dying and death hard. And that is this: even though death is inevitable, it is also uncertain. Both of those are frightening, aren't they? The inevitability of dying, there is absolutely nothing I can do to escape the clutches of death, and the uncertainty of death in this sense: I do not know when I will die or how I will die. And that combination, that strange, paradoxical combination of certainty and uncertainty, frightens us and is another contributor to the hardness of dying and death. And the third reason why we may find death terrifying and hence hard is its singularity. And by that I mean my death is different from everybody else's death. I can read about the death of another person and not feel particularly moved, but my death is something that I find terrifying. We all know the old syllogism, right? Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. We can read that abstractly and say, yeah, that's true. But when we substitute a first person pronoun for the name Socrates, things begin to change. My death is quite different from the death of everyone else. It's singular to me. And a corollary of that is this: because my death is singular, only I can experience it. Death is a lonely affair. I can be surrounded on my deathbed by a multitude of loved ones, but no one can accompany me. Dying is something I simply have to do on my own, by myself, and that's a hard, hard thing to enter into the darkness by one's self. So these three reasons for why death can terrify us explain why dying is hard. But moreover, if one truly is this terrified of ceasing to be, that terror can begin to infiltrate the way in which one lives one's life. Remember, our awareness of mortality is always in the back of our head, it always is haunting us. So if I'm this terrified of dying, I may be, for example, overly cautious about the way in which I live my life. Or every episode or experience of pleasure that I can undergo may have this shadow looming over it, an awareness, a bitter taste in my mouth of the terrifying hardness of dying. There are some people, particularly mid 20th century existentialists, who want to argue that because we know we must die, because we know that regardless of what we do throughout our lives, we will sink into nothingness, that life becomes absurd. And how can one live a life that is rewarding and fulfilling if one believes that one's entire existence is a bad joke? So, the first reason why some people may find dying and death hard is because they are terrified of it, and that terror can seep over into the way in which they live their lives. But there's another way of understanding why death is hard, because it does remain hard, and it's suggested by another contemporary philosopher named Thomas Nagel. Nagel says maybe it's not the case that we find death hard because we're terrified of dying, of ceasing to be. No, we find death hard because we are grieving the loss of something that we love: life. We love being alive. We love being. We love acting in the world. We love thinking and imagining. And all of that is taken away from us, says Nagel, when we die. So the real reason why we find dying hard is not so much because we are terrified of ceasing to be, but because we regret losing that which we love because of death, namely life. I can think of no better encapsulation of this way of thinking about the hardness of death than in a very short, only about 3 or 4 pages essay by the British author Virginia Woolf. It was published posthumously in 1942, and it's entitled The Death of a Moth. I would really recommend that you take a look at this little essay. You can easily find it online, by the way. So here's what's going on. Virginia Woolf seems to be sitting at a desk, and in front of her is a window. And outside of the window, she sees plowmen who are plowing up a field that's just been harvested. It's mid September. She senses vitality everywhere outside. The earth itself is gleaming with energy, she says, as the plow upturns it. The horses that the plowmen are using, the plowmen themselves, all seem to be vitally alive on this beautiful mid September morning. There are rooks who are flying in the air and pirouetting with great apparent joy at the sheer fact of being alive. And then she notices on the inside of the window next to her a moth. And this moth is fluttering against the window pane, apparently seeing exactly what she's seeing and wanting to join it, wanting to be part of it. And so the moth, not quite grasping that this glass is an impenetrable barrier, begins to fly from one corner of the window pane to the next, really trying to get out, frenetic in its desire, in its efforts to get out and join this vitality that is coursing throughout the external world. And as she looks at him, Virginia Woolf thinks this. It was as if someone had taken a tiny bead of pure life and, decking it as lightly as possible with down and feathers, had set it dancing and zigzagging to show us the true nature of life. Somehow, in this little creature yearning to be outside and part of all this vitality, Virginia Woolf sees a symbol of life itself. And then she reflects that this tiny, tiny creature, even were it able to get on the other side of the window, would enjoy only a tiny, tiny portion of the vitality that she sees coursing throughout not only the landscape, but also apparently throughout all of reality. And she says this. The possibilities of pleasure seemed that morning so enormous and so various that to have only a moth's part in life, and a day moth's at that, appeared a hard fate. There's something about the sheer goodness of being, the sheer energy of life. She uses those words frequently: vigor, energy, vitality, that we crave. And the more of it that we can get, the more we crave. How sad that this little moth can only enjoy a small portion of it. But of course, what she's saying is it's also sad that we human beings can only enjoy a small portion, proportionate to the kinds of creatures we are, of the vitality that saturates reality. Finally, the moth, exhausted, drops onto the windowsill, and Virginia Woolf watches it as it curls its legs and dies. And she reflects that was all that the moth could do. What he could do, he did. What the moth could do was to strain as best he could to drink deeply of life. He did what he could do. And somehow Virginia Woolf finds that admirable. Obviously, this is a parable about human beings, right? We are alive. We know we must die and that death will come for us regardless of what we do. But while we are here, we should struggle to absorb as much of the beauty and the vitality and the energy of life, of the sheer fact of being, as we possibly can. And as a matter of fact, simply knowing that our time in life is temporary can add a poignancy, a preciousness to our lives. We recognize, because our time is limited, that we ought not to take for granted the beauty, the exuberant feeling of being alive. Virginia Woolf also says this. One is apt to forget all about life, seeing it humped and bossed and garnished and cumbered, so that it has to move with the greatest circumspection and dignity. In the busyness of our everyday lives, we are apt to forget what a precious gift the sheer fact of our being is. If we did that, we would recognize immediately why death is hard. Not necessarily because dying and death are frightening, but because dying and death will rob us of something that we find so very precious and so very lovable, and that is life itself. So, in a certain kind of way, my friends, the first way of thinking about death, of being terrified by it, and thereby finding it hard, is one that robs us of a full appreciation of life. Whereas the second way of thinking about death and why it is hard, that it robs us of something that we love, life, can encourage us to throw ourselves even more exultantly into the process of living. I think that that's the far preferable way to deal with the hardness of our mortality. I'm Father Carey, and this has been another Holy Spirit moment. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. And if you are so minded, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. At any rate, I'll see you again soon. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye.